Moscow in the early 2000s was a city alive with contradictions. While neon-lit cafes and bustling luxury boutiques represented a newfound economic promise, the city's grand Soviet architecture, its severe concrete facades and towering buildings, held strong to Russia's history. The rapid transformation of the 1990s had set Moscow on a course of ambitious reinvention, pulling it into the future while the weight of its Soviet past anchored it in a deep, and sometimes dark, tradition. Moscow's streets hummed with a relentless energy, a feeling of possibility, urgency, and innovation. But hidden behind the facades, in the spaces between high-rise apartments and quiet, forgotten corners of parks, a dark presence cast an invisible shadow across the city. Amid Moscow's busy squares and crowded sidewalks, Alexander Pichushkin moved with disturbing ease. An unassuming man who frequented chess clubs and rarely drew attention, he blended easily into the urban crowd. Yet Pichushkin harbored dark ambitions unlike any Moscow had ever seen. Driven by a compulsion as sharp and cold as the Moscow winter, he sought not wealth or status, but a sense of control, of ruthless achievement. In his mind, this quest meant one thing: to take 64 lives, one for each square on a chessboard. What drives a person to see human lives as nothing more than pieces on a board, to be moved and removed? To understand his dark ambition, one must first look at Pichushkin's beginnings and the early experiences that twisted his path. Born in 1974, Alexander was a solitary child who seemed to stand out in subtle, unsettling ways. He was intelligent yet often appeared deeply troubled. Teachers and neighbors recalled the young boy's quiet intensity, describing a child who was quick to anger and prone to dark, morbid thoughts. Beneath his silence lay an intelligence that few understood. Pichushkin excelled at chess from a young age, his calculating mind finding an outlet in the game's strategies, in its rules and power dynamics. Chess offered Pichushkin a world where control was absolute, and his gift for the game seemed to embody his growing obsession with power. But soon, this controlled intensity would be shattered, giving way to something far darker. One afternoon, a seemingly ordinary trip to a local park would change his life forever. Alexander, playing alone, suffered a traumatic head injury when he fell from a swing. The fall damaged parts of his brain responsible for impulse control and emotional regulation, and from that day forward, friends and family noted a dramatic change in his behavior. The quiet, intense child became a young man who was volatile and prone to violent fantasies. His intelligence turned inward, his thoughts growing darker and more twisted as he navigated a world he no longer seemed to relate to. Chess, once a healthy outlet, transformed into a fixation, and his view of the game shifted. To Pichushkin, chess became not merely a game of pieces and strategies but a metaphor for life itself, where human lives were as expendable as pawns. As he drifted into adolescence, Pichushkin's fascination with power grew deeper. He made disturbing remarks, casually speaking of violence and death in ways that unsettled his classmates. He once told a peer that life without killing is like life without food. A statement that others chalked up to dark humor, but that, in truth, reflected his most intimate beliefs. These comments revealed the first hints of a dark destiny that would soon horrify an entire city. His teenage years were marked by isolation, as his fixation on violent fantasies deepened and took root in his psyche. He retreated from the company of others, slipping further into his own world, a place where human life was fragile, and where control could be achieved only through blood. As he entered adulthood in the early 1990s, Russia was a nation undergoing radical transformation. The fall of the Soviet Union had left the country in a state of economic instability and social upheaval. It was in these tumultuous years that Pichushkin's fantasies became grim realities. His chosen hunting ground was Bitsa Park, a sprawling expanse of woods and winding paths located on Moscow's outskirts. To most, the park was a place of retreat, a natural escape from the city. But to Pichushkin, it was an ideal setting, a perfect labyrinth of hidden trails and dense foliage where he could indulge his darkest impulses without the risk of interruption. His first targets were those society often overlooked: the homeless, the elderly, and the disenfranchised souls who frequented the park, living on society's margins. These were people who, much like pawns on a chessboard, were seldom noticed. Pichushkin approached them with a friendly demeanor, a bottle of vodka often in hand. Alcohol became his primary tool of trust, lowering his victims' defenses as they saw only a companion, a fellow soul willing to share a drink and a conversation. Once intoxicated, Pichushkin would lead his victims deeper into the shadows, far from the safety of populated areas. When they were alone and vulnerable, his true intentions revealed themselves in a moment of merciless violence. His weapon of choice was a blunt object, often a hammer wielded with lethal precision. Each blow was calculated, each life taken with cold detachment. His actions were not fueled by rage, rather. His violence was chillingly controlled, each attack executed with the precision of a player making a calculated move on a chessboard. Every death was another step toward his goal, another square filled on the mental chessboard he carried in his mind. With each life claimed, Pichushkin's sense of purpose only grew stronger, the thrill of his ambition feeding his twisted obsession. Moscow's authorities soon became aware that something sinister was happening within the confines of Bitsa Park. Bodies were occasionally discovered, often scattered or hidden in secluded spots. However, the victims seemed disconnected, with no clear pattern linking them beyond their unfortunate circumstances. The murders appeared to be random acts of violence, the work of a ghost who left no trace but death in his wake. By targeting society's marginalized, Pichushkin evaded immediate suspicion. The police, overwhelmed with other cases in the economically strained post-Soviet era, overlooked the pattern, dismissing the deaths as the tragic yet disconnected fates of those living on the fringes. But Pichushkin's determination grew more audacious with each murder. As the body count rose, he began to experiment with new methods, incorporating symbols and signatures that hinted at his ultimate goal. Occasionally, he would leave pieces of paper or small objects on his victims, subtle markers that were almost invisible to authorities, but that held profound meaning for him. He was leaving clues, breadcrumbs that pointed to his game, his twisted artistry. It was not until 2006 that Pichushkin's luck ran out. Marina Moskalova, a woman who would unknowingly become his final target, was a sharp-witted and cautious individual. Before meeting Pichushkin, she left a note for her son detailing her plans, including his name and the time she expected to return. When she failed to come home that night, her family quickly contacted authorities, and the note she had left provided investigators with their first real lead. When they traced her steps, they found themselves face to face with Alexander Pichushkin, who until then had successfully hidden his monstrous nature from the world. The weight of his crimes became apparent when the police conducted a search of his apartment. What they found inside shocked the seasoned investigators: a physical chessboard meticulously marked with dates and names, a log of his victims that bore chilling testimony to his ambition. Each square represented a life, each move a murder. He had kept a record of each life he had taken, a silent witness to the horror he had wrought. The sheer detachment with which he had documented his crimes horrified the detectives, yet Pichushkin showed no remorse. Instead, he openly confessed to his actions, lamenting not the loss of life but only his inability to complete his chessboard. The world watched in horror as Pichushkin's trial became a media spectacle. Reporters from across the globe chronicled every detail of the proceedings, capturing the raw pain of the victims' families who filled the courtroom. For these families, the ordeal was nothing short of torture. They were forced to listen as Pichushkin recounted the final moments of their loved ones, describing the murders with the same detachment one might use to recount a mundane task. Pichushkin spoke of his goal with cold clarity, and his only regret, it seemed, was that he had been stopped too soon. To him, each life was merely another square on his board, each death a calculated move in a game only he could understand. In the end, Pichushkin was sentenced to life in prison, the first 15 years of which were to be served in solitary confinement. His chessboard, his dark instrument of ambition, was left unfinished, a testament to his monstrous aspirations left incomplete. Pichushkin's victims were finally given a measure of justice, but for the families the loss was irreversible. The loved ones they mourned had been reduced to mere numbers in a madman's deranged game, each life stolen for nothing more than a man's obsession. The grief left behind was profound, a permanent scar on their lives that could never truly heal. Today, Bitsa Park has returned to its former state of quiet, a place where families stroll, couples walk hand in hand, and children play along the winding paths. Yet for those who know its history, the park holds a haunted quality, a reminder of the lives lost to a man's dark ambition. Moscow, too, remembers. Pichushkin's story serves as a cautionary tale, a reminder of the darkness that can lurk behind seemingly ordinary faces. His crimes are a testament to humanity's capacity for evil, the fragility of life, and the chilling reality that unchecked ambition, when left to fester in a dark mind, can lead to unimaginable horrors. For the people of Moscow, and for the families of his victims, remembering the lives he took is an act of defiance against his legacy. His story remains not merely a tale of murder but a reflection on the dangers of obsession, a warning of the darkness that lies in unchecked human ambition. In remembering, the city honors the lives he stole, ensuring they are remembered not as mere squares on a board but as real people who had families, dreams, and futures that were tragically cut short. In this remembrance, they reclaim the humanity Pichushkin sought to erase, their memories living on as a testament to the strength and resilience of the human spirit.